Ethan Cole had lived alone on the island for 3 years. It was not a large island, just a strip of white sand, thick green forest in the middle, and rocky cliffs on the far side. The ocean was his neighbor, his guard, and his endless companion. Every morning, the sound of waves woke him, and every night, the same waves sang him to sleep. He had left the city because it was too noisy, too fast, and too full of people who only cared about themselves. On the island, he could breathe. Here he fished for his own meals, built his own shelter, and grew a small garden behind his cabin. He did not need anyone else, or at least, that's what he told himself. The day had been hot, the kind of heat that made the sea look like glass. Ethan spent the afternoon repairing his fishing net, humming quietly. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in gold and orange, he carried the net to the beach. That's when he saw it. Something strange. High above the horizon, a light. No, not just one. Several lights, flickering in the darkening sky. At first, he thought it was an airplane, but the lights moved too fast, zigzagging like no plane could. Then came a sound, faint at first but growing, a deep, vibrating hum, like thunder trapped in metal. He shaded his eyes and watched as one of the lights suddenly broke away from the rest and began falling. It was not falling like a burning rock. It was controlled, struggling, almost alive in its movement. Ethan's heart pounded as it dropped lower and lower until, splash! The ocean exploded with white foam about 1/2 kilometer from shore. Ethan froze. His first thought was that it might be a helicopter crash and someone could be hurt. His second thought was more uneasy. Whatever it wasn't normal. The waves calmed after a minute, and for a while, nothing happened. Then, a dark shape appeared on the water's surface, drifting toward the beach. The tide was bringing it closer. Ethan grabbed a lantern from his cabin and walked quickly to the shore. The shape moved with the waves until it finally touched the sand with a dull thud. It was wreckage. Pieces of smooth, silver-like metal, curved in strange ways, as if they had once been part of something round and sleek. And then he saw her. At first he thought it was a child. She was small, curled up and tangled in a piece of the wreck. Her skin was pale with a faint shimmer that caught the lantern light. Her hair was silver white, long enough to trail into the wet sand. She wore a strange, close-fitting suit with thin, glowing lines running along it. Ethan rushed forward and knelt beside her. She was breathing, fast and shallow, but her lips were blue, and her face was tense with pain. "Hey," he said softly, unsure if she could hear. "You're all right. I've got you." He pulled away the metal debris and gently lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. Her head rested weakly against his shoulder as he carried her up the beach toward the cabin. Inside, he laid her on his bed and covered her with a blanket. He lit the oil lamp, letting its warm glow fill the room. The girl, or whatever she was, looked different. Her ears were slightly pointed, her eyes closed but showing long silver lashes. Her suit was torn in several places, revealing a faint, shifting glow beneath her skin, like light passing underwater. Ethan's mind raced. She wasn't human. There was no other explanation. But right now she was hurt, and that was what mattered. He heated some water on the stove and carefully cleaned the cuts on her face and arms. She stirred once, murmuring something in a soft, musical tone he didn't recognize. It sounded almost like singing, but the words meant nothing to him. "Shh," he said gently. "Rest. You're safe here." When he was done tending to her wounds, he sat by the table staring at her. He wondered where she had come from. Was she alone? Were there more like her? And what about those other lights in the sky? Were they still out there? Hours passed. The night deepened, and the stars glittered outside the window. Ethan dozed off in his chair, the soft sound of waves mixing with the quiet hum of the oil lamp. A sudden sound woke him, a faint gasp. He looked toward the bed. The girl was awake. Her large eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, a color he had never seen before, somewhere between blue and silver. She stared at him, frightened but curious. Ethan slowly raised his hands, palms open, to show he meant no harm. "It's okay. You're safe." She tilted her head, studying him, then said something in that same melodic language. Ethan shook his head, wishing he could understand. After a moment, she touched her chest and said softly, "Leo, Ra." He realized she was telling him her name. "Leora," he repeated. He pointed at himself. "Ethan." Her lips curved just slightly, as if testing the shape of his name. "Ethan." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of the ocean. She seemed lost, like someone far from home. Ethan wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't send her away. Not tonight. Not when she had fallen from the sky and washed up on his shore. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of that strange humming sound from earlier. It was distant now, but it made the hairs on Ethan's neck stand on end. Something told him that whatever had brought Leora here might come back, and if it did, his quiet. Life on the island would never be the same again. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, spilling golden light across the beach. Ethan had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the strange lights in the sky, the crash in the ocean, and the pale, silver-haired girl lying in the sand. Now she was in his cabin, sitting up against the headboard, watching him with cautious eyes. She seemed stronger than last night, though her movements were still slow. Her glowing suit was torn, and he could see faint shimmer beneath her skin. Ethan handed her a wooden cup of water. "Drink. You need it." She took it with both hands, sniffed it carefully, then sipped. A moment later, she whispered in that melodic language of hers. The translator device, if she even had one, wasn't working, so they were left with gestures and expressions. He pointed to himself. "Ethan." She nodded slowly. "Ethan." Then she touched her chest. "Leora." Her voice was soft, almost musical, and it matched the strange light in her eyes. Ethan looked at her for a moment, then asked, "Leora, where are you from?" He knew she wouldn't understand the words, but maybe his tone would get the question across. She paused, as if thinking, then reached for a piece of charcoal from his desk and drew on the wooden floor. The picture started with a small circle. Then she drew several larger circles around it, connected by lines. Finally, she pointed out the window toward the sky. He realized what she was saying. She came from far away. When she finished, she tapped the small circle in the center and spoke a long, gentle string of sounds. Ethan guessed it was the name of her world, though he could never hope to repeat it. She then pointed to herself and made a motion like flying through the air before making a crash motion with her hands. Her face grew serious, and her gaze drifted to the window, as if worried something was still out there. Ethan leaned forward. "Were you alone?" She hesitated, then slowly shook her head. She reached toward the small device on her wrist, something that looked like a broken bracelet of silver metal. The lines on it glowed faintly, flickered, then died. Whatever it was no longer working. After a long silence, Leora pointed at the blanket and then at herself, then held both hands together under her cheek in the universal sign for sleep. She spoke again, slower this time, and Ethan thought he caught the meaning. She wanted to stay here. "Stay?" he asked, just to be sure. Her expression softened. She nodded, and in careful English she said, "Stay here." Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had been alone for years by choice, but hearing those words from someone who had fallen from the stars, it was different. This was not a neighbor asking to visit. This was a being from another world, asking to share his home forever. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a small smile. "All right, Leora, you can stay." Her lips curved into the faintest smile in return. They spent the rest of the morning trying to communicate. Ethan showed her the tools he used: his fishing net, hammer, and knives. She examined them with fascination, running her fingers along the wood and metal. In return, she showed him the small items she had saved from the wreck: thin crystal shards that glowed faintly when touched, a cube that seemed to project shapes in the air, and a small metallic sphere that floated when she released it. Ethan was amazed, but also cautious. He didn't know what any of it could do, and he didn't want to accidentally break something. Leora, sensing his caution, carefully placed the items back in a cloth bag and tied it shut. Later, he cooked fish over a small fire pit outside. Leora sat beside him, watching as he turned the skewers. She pointed to the fire, saying something in her own tongue, and then made a sound like an explosion. "Yeah," Ethan chuckled. "Fire can be dangerous." When they ate, she copied his movements, taking the fish with her fingers, blowing gently on it before tasting. She closed her eyes for a moment, clearly surprised by the flavor. Then she took another bite. As the afternoon passed, Ethan noticed something unusual. Every so often, Leora would glance toward the ocean with a worried look. She would listen, for long moments, as if she could hear something he couldn't. Finally, he asked, "Leora, what's wrong?" She hesitated, then pointed toward the horizon and made a motion like a wave chasing something. Then she tapped her ear and shook her head, as if trying to say the sound was gone, but she still feared it might return. Ethan remembered the strange humming he'd heard last night. It had been faint, but it was unlike any boat or aircraft he knew. Night fell again, and the two of them sat by the cabin's lantern light. The ocean breeze was cool, carrying the smell of salt and the sound of the tide. Leora suddenly leaned forward and said in halting English, "Not safe." "Here." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Not safe? Why?" She pressed her hands together, then pulled them apart sharply, like something breaking. Then she pointed to herself, then made a circular motion with her hand, then pointed up at the sky. He didn't understand all of it, but the meaning was clear enough. She was running from something, and they might be looking for her. Ethan leaned, back in his chair, staring at the wooden beams of the cabin ceiling. His quiet life had just been turned upside down. If whoever was chasing her came here, the island would no longer be the peaceful home he had known. But when he looked back at her, small, tired, yet still watching him with trust, he knew his decision was already made. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "You can stay. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Leora blinked, then gave a slow nod. For the first time, she looked truly at ease. Outside, far beyond the reach of the island's shore, something moved in the night sky, a faint light sliding between the stars. Neither of them saw it. Morning light spilled across the cabin floor, painting golden stripes on the wooden boards. Ethan woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Leora was already up, standing near the window. She was watching the waves with a thoughtful expression, the sunlight turning her silver hair into a shining halo. "Good morning," Ethan said, stretching. She turned, smiled faintly, and replied in her gentle voice, "Gutse." "Morning." Her English was still slow and broken, but every day she seemed to understand more. The days had begun to follow a quiet pattern. Ethan taught Leora how to do small island tasks, fetching water from the stream, helping him pull the fishing net, and gathering coconuts. She learned quickly. watching carefully and copying every move until she could do it herself. In return, Leora shared things about her own world. She drew pictures in the sand to explain her floating cities, which drifted on oceans of liquid light. She described tall towers made of crystal that could sing when the wind passed through them. Ethan listened in silence, imagining such places, but the way her eyes sometimes dimmed told him she missed her home. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting by the beach, holding a small glowing crystal in her hands. It was one of the pieces she had saved from the wreck. When he sat beside her, she held it out for him to see. "Memory," she said softly. "Memory," he repeated. She nodded and tapped the crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint image shimmered in the air. Above it, Ethan's eyes widened. He saw a vast, blue-white city floating in space, surrounded by ships shaped like silver wings. The vision faded quickly, leaving the crystal dim again. "That's incredible," he whispered. Leora smiled faintly, but tucked the crystal back into her bag, as if it was too precious to show for long. They were learning to communicate better. Sometimes she used her broken English. Other times, she would point and gesture, laughing when Ethan guessed wrong. He discovered she liked the taste of coconut milk, hated the smell of the fishing bait, and loved sitting near the fire at night. But not everything was peaceful. Ethan noticed that every evening Leora would grow quiet and watch the horizon, her eyes scanning for something. One night, he asked, "You're looking for them, aren't you?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "They follow. They not stop." Ethan leaned forward. "Who are they?" Her voice lowered. "Hunters." The word was simple, but the way she said it made the air feel colder. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the wreck, the strange humming in the sky, and the faint light he had seen moving among the stars. Whoever these hunters were, they had technology far beyond his own worlds. If they came here, he and Leora would be alone against them. The next morning, while walking near the far side of the island, Ethan noticed something strange. The sand near the rocks was disturbed, not by waves or crabs, but by something heavy that had pressed down into it. The marks were faint, but the shape was unlike any animal he knew. When he told Leora, her face went pale. She examined the marks closely, then whispered in her language, too fast for him to understand. Finally, she said in English, "Close. Close." They decided to prepare. Ethan began checking his fishing traps and nets, thinking how they could be used for defense. Leora took out some of her alien devices and showed him how they worked. One was a thin disc that, when thrown, floated in the air and spun rapidly, sending out a faint hum. She called it a veil. It could bend light around them for a few seconds, making them nearly invisible. Another was a small rod that, when pressed, released a flash of light so bright it hurt his eyes even through closed lids. Ethan realized that with her tech and his knowledge of the island, they might have a chance if the hunters came. That evening, they sat by the fire, roasting fish. The smell drifted on the wind and the stars shone brightly overhead. Leora was quieter than usual, staring at the flames. "You thinking about home?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "Home? Far. Too far." Then, after a pause, she looked at him and said, "This home now?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled. "If you want it to be." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she said clearly, "I want." They ate in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence. Later that night, Ethan stepped outside to check the tide. The moonlight painted the waves silver, and everything seemed calm. But when he looked toward the horizon, he froze. Far out to sea, barely visible, a faint blue light moved slowly across the water. It wasn't a boat. No sound of an engine reached him, and the light glowed too steadily. Ethan went back inside and quietly closed the door. Leora looked at him, reading the tension on his face. "They're here, aren't they?" she whispered. He nodded. She stood, her small frame tense but determined. Then, "We get ready." The peaceful days on the island were over. The next would bring something neither of them could fully prepare for. The night was heavy with silence. Even the waves seemed quieter, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Ethan and Leora stood just outside the cabin, their eyes fixed on the faint blue light far out to sea. It moved slowly but with purpose, gliding toward the island. "They come," Leora said softly. Ethan swallowed. "How many?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something beyond his hearing. 3, maybe 4. That was enough to make his chest tighten. He didn't know what these hunters looked like, but the fear in Leora's voice told him everything. These were no ordinary visitors. They went inside the cabin. Ethan began pulling out supplies: rope, fishing nets, sharpened stakes, and a few old metal tools. Leora brought out her alien devices and laid them on the table. Together, they began to plan. Ethan knew the island better than anyone. The dense jungle in the center, the rocky cliffs on the west side, and the narrow sand paths between boulders could all be used to their advantage. Leora showed him how to use her veil discs, small silver plates that could hide them for a few seconds if needed. She also had 2 light rods that could stun enemies with a blinding flash. They worked quickly. Ethan strung fishing nets between trees, low enough to trip someone running. He sharpened long bamboo poles and hid them under shallow piles of leaves. Leora placed her tech devices in hidden spots, each ready to trigger when pressed. Hours passed, and the blue light grew closer until it reached the shore. Ethan and Leora crouched behind a thick bush, watching. A small craft slid onto the sand. It was shaped like a dark, curved shell, glowing faintly from underneath. The top opened with a hiss, and figures stepped out. Ethan's breath caught. They were taller than him, thin but strong-looking, wearing black armor that glistened like wet stone. Their faces were hidden behind smooth masks with glowing eye slits. One of them carried a device that swept back and forth, emitting a soft pulse. Leora's hand gripped Ethan's arm. "Tracker," she whispered. The hunters spread out, moving in eerie silence. 2 headed toward the jungle while the others scanned the beach. Ethan and Leora moved deeper into the trees, staying low. The first trap was waiting. A hunter stepped forward, and his foot caught in the net. In one swift motion, Ethan pulled the rope, lifting the figure into the air. The hunter struggled, slicing at the net with a glowing blade. The others reacted. Instantly, a flash of light burst from Leora's hand as she triggered one of her devices. The nearest hunter staggered, blinded, giving Ethan enough time to push a heavy branch into him, knocking him into the sand. But these enemies were fast. The one in the net sliced himself free and dropped to the ground. They regrouped quickly. "Scanning the trees! Move!" Ethan hissed, and they ran deeper into the jungle. The second trap was more dangerous. As a hunter chased them, his foot hit a hidden tripline. A sharpened bamboo stake swung down from above, striking his armor with a loud crack. It didn't pierce through, but it knocked him to the ground. Leora tossed another small disc, which spun in the air and released a piercing hum. The hunter froze in place, shaking, before collapsing. Ethan's heart pounded. They were slowing. The hunters down, but they wouldn't be able to hold them off forever. Near the cliffs, the third trap waited. They ducked into a narrow path between 2 boulders, luring the remaining hunters after them. Ethan had tied ropes high above, holding back a pile of heavy stones. As the hunters entered the path, Ethan yanked the rope. The stones tumbled down, slamming into the path and cutting off pursuit. One hunter was hit and didn't move again. The other backed away, scanning for another route. For a brief moment, there was silence again, broken only by the distant sound of the ocean. Ethan turned to Leora. "We can't keep running. We have to make a stand." She nodded, pulling out the last of her devices, a small sphere. "Last weapon," she said. "Strong." They moved toward the beach again, hiding in the shadows. The sphere in Leora's hand pulsed with light, like a heartbeat. When the last two hunters emerged from the trees, they were cautious now, scanning every shadow. Leora stepped forward and threw the sphere. It hovered for a second before releasing a blinding flash and a wave of force that knocked both hunters to the ground. Their armor sparked and hissed as they twitched, unable to stand. Ethan ran forward and kicked away their weapons. The air smelled faintly of burned metal. Leora approached one of the fallen hunters and looked at the mask for a long moment. Her voice was low. "They will come again. More next time." Ethan felt the truth of her words. This was only the first wave. They stood together on the beach as the small craft began to hum again. The remaining hunters, wounded but alive, crawled inside. The craft lifted slightly, turned toward the open sea, and glided away until it vanished into the night. Ethan let out a long breath. His arms ached, and his shirt was torn. But they had survived. Leora looked at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and worry. "You fight for me." Ethan smiled faintly. "We fight for us." But even as he said it, he knew their quiet life was gone. Somewhere out there, more hunters would be planning their return. And next time, the fight might be far worse. The sky had been gray all morning, but by the afternoon it turned almost black. Ethan knew that kind of darkness. It meant a tropical storm was coming fast. The wind picked up, howling through the palm trees, and waves crashed harder against the shore. He grabbed the few supplies they had brought to the cave, his mind racing with how to keep them both safe. Lyra stood near the entrance, looking up at the sky. Her tiny figure seemed even smaller against the roaring wind, but there was no fear in her bright silver eyes, only determination. "This storm, it is strong but different," she said, her voice raised to be heard. "I feel something inside it." Ethan didn't understand, but he trusted her instincts. "Whatever's inside it, we're not going to face it out here. Come on." He pulled her toward the deeper part of the cave as rain started to fall, like sheets of glass. The wind outside grew into a furious scream. The entrance of the cave shook as if the storm itself wanted to come in. Ethan had been through storms before, but nothing like this. The rain didn't just fall. It seemed to swirl sideways, carried by unnatural currents. Lyra sat cross-legged on the cave floor, her small hands pressed together, eyes shut tight. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, crouching beside her. I'm listening," she said softly. "The storm is not only nature, it is a voice." Ethan frowned, unsure if she was speaking in metaphor or if this was another alien ability he didn't understand. "A voice? You mean like a signal?" Her eyes opened suddenly. "Yes, a signal. It is calling to me." Ethan's mind flashed, with the memory of her arrival, how she had come to his island in that small, strange craft. If this was a signal, could it be her people? Or worse, something else? The storm raged for hours. Water ran in rivulets down the cave walls, and the ocean's roar was a constant background thunder. Lyra seemed restless, her silver eyes darting toward the entrance again and again. Finally, when the wind eased just enough, she stood. "I have to find the source. It is close now." Ethan wanted to stop her, but something in her tone told him it was important. They stepped into the storm's aftermath, broken branches, scattered leaves, and seawater pooling across the sand. The air was heavy with the smell of salt and rain. Then Ethan saw it, a faint, pulsing blue light on the far side of the beach. It blinked slowly, almost like it was breathing. "That's it," Lyra said, already moving toward it. They approached cautiously. The light came from a strange metal sphere half buried in the sand, about the size of a basketball. It wasn't any technology Ethan recognized. It gave off a low hum, and as Lyra reached out to touch it, the surface rippled like liquid. The hum grew louder, and a voice, not quite human but clear, spoke in a language Ethan couldn't understand. Lyra replied quickly in the same strange tongue, her words flowing fast and sharp. When she turned back to Ethan, her face was pale. "It is my people. They know I am alive, but—" She hesitated. "They are not the ones I hoped for." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "They are the hunters, the ones who will take me back. They will not let me stay here." The sphere flashed brighter, and Ethan felt a chill run through him. If her people were coming, they would likely come armed, ready to take her whether she wanted it or not. "How long do we have?" he asked. Lyra looked out to the horizon, where the storm clouds were breaking apart. "Not long. Maybe one day." Ethan stared at the glowing sphere, then at her. He had never thought of himself as a fighter, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her be taken without a choice. "Then we'd better be ready." Lyra gave a small, sad smile. "You would protect me, even against the stars?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "You stayed when you didn't have to. Now it's my turn." The blue light kept pulsing, calling across the distance. The ocean was calm now, but Ethan could almost feel the shadow of what was coming. Somewhere out there, a ship was on its way. And when it arrived, nothing on the island would ever be the same again. But Ethan had made up his mind. They would face it together, no matter who or what came out of the sky. The wind was calm that morning. The sea whispered softly against the shore, and the sunlight stretched golden fingers over the sand. Ethan stood near the water's edge, his feet sinking into the wet sand as each wave touched him. For so long, this island had been his prison and his home at the same time. Now it felt like something else entirely, a place full of life, laughter, and possibility. Behind him, Lyra was busy tying a small bundle of supplies together. Her hands moved quickly, and her antenna twitched as if she was both excited and nervous. She had told Ethan the night before that she wanted to build something, a signal post that could both hide the island and protect it. Ethan didn't understand all of her alien technology, but he trusted her. "You're quiet," she said, glancing at him while she worked. "Just thinking," Ethan replied. "When I washed up here, I thought it was the end of my life. Now—" He paused, looking at her. "Now I'm glad it happened." Lyra's small face softened. "I'm glad, too." The days after the attack had been busy. The hostile aliens were gone, their ship destroyed far out at sea, thanks to Lyra's quick thinking and Ethan's determination. But they both knew the attackers might not have been the last. Someone, somewhere, might be searching for her. They had worked together to make the island safer. Lyra built strange devices that shimmered faintly, creating a hidden shield over part of the coast. Ethan reinforced shelters and stored food. The place that had once been simple survival now felt like a fortress. Still, life wasn't only about defense anymore. The two of them started exploring parts of the island Ethan had never dared to travel before. There were waterfalls hidden deep in the jungle, glowing flowers that only opened at night, and small creatures that seemed just as curious about Lyra as she was about them. One afternoon, as they were walking along the cliffs, Lyra stopped suddenly. Her antenna twitched, and she looked up at the sky. "A ship," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze. Far above, a silver dot moved slowly across the blue. His body tensed. It's not one of mine, Lyra said, her voice calm but serious. And it's not like the ones who attacked us before. It's different. The dot passed by, heading toward the horizon. Ethan let out a slow breath. Think they saw us? No, she said after a moment. Not with the shield up, but... She looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. It's only a matter of time before someone does. That night, they sat by the fire, the stars scattered above them. Ethan noticed Lyra was unusually quiet. Finally, he asked, You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? She didn't answer right away. The firelight made her silver skin glow softly. Part of me wants to go, she admitted, to see my people again, to tell them I'm safe. But another part? She looked at him, her expression gentle. Another part wants to stay, here, with you. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. If you go, I'll understand, he said, though the words were hard to speak. But I'd miss you. Lyra smiled faintly. You're not as alone as you were before. Even if I left, I'd come back. The next morning, Lyra was up early, working on another device. She explained it was a hidden transmitter, something she could use to send a single message to her people without giving away the island's location. Ethan watched her work, realizing that whatever happened next, this island would always be different now. When she finished, they carried the transmitter to the highest cliff. Lyra adjusted it, pressed a series of glowing symbols, and stepped back. A faint hum filled the air, and then it was done. Somewhere, light years away, her message was racing toward the stars. They stood there for a long time, watching the sea. Finally, Ethan asked, So, what now? Lyra tilted her head, smiling. Now, we live. And they did. The weeks that followed felt almost peaceful. They fished, repaired shelters, and explored new caves. Lyra taught Ethan some of her people's language, laughing when he mispronounced the strange words. Ethan showed her how to weave palm leaves into sturdy mats, something she had never done before. Sometimes Ethan thought about the outside world, about the life he had before. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't miss it as much as he thought he would. The island wasn't just a place to survive anymore. It was a place to belong. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, Ethan and Lyra sat side by side, their shoulders touching. The sky burned with colors, red, gold, and deep purple. Lyra glanced at him and said quietly, When I first found you, you looked lost. Now you don't. Ethan smiled. That's because I'm not. Far above, stars began to appear. Somewhere. Maybe someone was coming. Maybe they would bring danger. Maybe they would bring change. But whatever happened, Ethan knew one thing. He would not face it alone. The island that had once been silent was alive now, with laughter, with friendship, and with the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time since the day his shipwreck brought him here, Ethan didn't want to leave.